Louie Spicolli was born on February 10, 1971, and would leave a lasting impact on the world of professional wrestling. Tragically, his journey was cut short when he passed away on February 15, 1998, at the age of 27. Known by several ring names throughout his career, Louie's wrestling journey took him across multiple countries and promotions. In Mexico, he competed under the name Madonna's Boyfriend, a persona that captured attention for its unique twist. In the US, Louie was best known for his time in the World Wrestling Federation, where he wrestled as Rad Radford. He was part of the company's talent roster during the 1990s, captivating audiences with his in-ring style. Later, he found his way into Extreme Championship Wrestling and World Championship Wrestling, where he took on the persona of Louie Spicolli. It was during this time that his reputation as a versatile and skilled wrestler began to truly solidify. Louie is often credited as the innovator in one of professional wrestling's most impactful finishing moves, the Death Valley Driver. In WCW, he wore t-shirts proudly proclaiming his role in its creation, cementing his legacy in the wrestling world. However, the true origins of the Death Valley Driver are debated. Some suggest that it was first developed by Japanese female wrestler Etsuko Mita, adding an air of mystery to its history. Though his life was tragically short, Louie Spicolli's contributions to professional wrestling, particularly his impact on the development of the Death Valley Driver, continued to be remembered by fans and wrestlers alike. And this is his story. Louis Mucciolo Jr., better known to the world as Louie Spicolli, was born on February 10, 1971 in Woodlands Hills, California. Growing up in a working-class Italian-American household, young Louie wasn't handed much, but he found something that lit a fire inside him early on: professional wrestling. Even as a child, Louie was full of energy, charismatic, mischievous, and endlessly passionate. Though he struggled with weight issues and early bouts of insecurity, he quickly learned to use humor and heart to win people over. Wrestling wasn't just entertainment for Louie, it was destiny. By the time he was just 12 years old, Louie was studying wrestling like a science, attending local matches, memorizing moves, and idolizing heroes like Roddy Piper, Eddie Gilbert, and Ric Flair. While other kids played sports, Louie dreamt of suplexes and steel cages. At 16, Louie took the next step. He began formal wrestling training under the respected Big Bill Anderson in Los Angeles. Despite his young age and a stocky build, Louie impressed trainers with his work ethic and deep understanding of ring psychology. Hungry for experience, Louie worked anywhere he could, often pulling double duty under different names on the same card. He was tireless, willing to take any bump, any role, just to learn. In 1988, as he turned 17, Louie made an extraordinary leap, working as an enhancement talent for the World Wrestling Federation. Through Big Bill Anderson's connections, Louie debuted on TV tapings across California, appearing on shows like WWF Superstars and Wrestling Challenge. Sometimes billed under his real name, sometimes as Louie Spicolli, he entered the squared circle against giants like the Ultimate Warrior, Ted DiBiase, and the British Bulldogs. The matches were short, but Louie's selling was masterful. His ability to make opponents' moves look devastating quickly made him a favorite among agents and veterans backstage. Though still green, Louie's reputation was growing. He was known for his bump-taking ability, his positive attitude, and his willingness to pay his dues, traits that would define both his rise in the business and ultimately his tragic fall. Louie spent the early 90s on the independent circuit. He wrestled for Herb Abrams' Universal Wrestling Federation as Cutie Pie and ventured into Arizona in 1991, where he captured the Interwest Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Championship under the alias The Zodiac. After more World Wrestling Federation appearances as an enhancement talent, he returned to Mexico as the Killer Blonde and even wrestled for Japan's Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, until he was fired by Onita for throwing a bottle of urine out of a bus window. He had brief stints in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, where he feuded with Chris Candido for the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship and with AAA in Mexico as Madonna's boyfriend, joining the controversial Los Gringos Locos faction alongside Eddie Guerrero, Conan, and Art Barr. He wrestled in AAA's historic 1994 US pay-per-view When Worlds Collide. This exposure helped him land back in the WWF in 1995, repurchased by a neighbor, and spent several days in intensive care. Though he recovered, the WWF released him under the condition that he not work for WCW for a year, fearing bad press so soon after the steroid trial. Louie's lifelong dream was to make it in the WWF. After he left the Federation, he isolated himself, and his appetite for party favors grew as he struggled with depression. But by mid-1996, he resurfaced in Extreme Championship Wrestling. Clashing with the likes of Tommy Dreamer, he found a new home. He started off as a babyface, but turned heel. Dreamer would later call Louie a talented, driven performer who left it all in the ring. His time in ECW was short-lived. ECW owner Paul Heyman discovered Louie had been negotiating with both the W and WCW behind the scenes. Combined with his ongoing drug issues, he was let go. Paul Heyman would later comment, "Louie had a spark, a real presence. You could tell he was heading for something big." Louie still remained active. He wrestled for Empire Wrestling Federation, largely as a favor to Bill Anderson, who co-owned the promotion at the time. Then in late 1997, he signed with the WCW. There, Louie aligned himself with longtime friend Scott Hall and became part of the NWO, dubbing himself the Real Innovator. He mocked ECW rival Tommy Dreamer. Behind the commentary desk, he impressed fans with his comedic timing and sharp wit, though he did receive backlash after joking about the Oklahoma City bombing on air. Eric Bischoff saw potential, reportedly describing him as the Chris Farley of wrestling. Scott Hall would comment, "Louie was my boy, man, funny, smart. You could see the pain sometimes, but mostly he was just trying to make everyone laugh." He soon began a feud with Larry Zbyszko, stealing and smashing his golf clubs on live TV. A match between the two was scheduled for Super Brawl 8 on February 22, 1998. His last match was on February 9th on WCW Monday Nitro, where he lost to Chris Adams by disqualification. Bret Hart recalled a conversation between Louie and Owen Hart. Owen sat talking with Louie Spicolli, a good kid who was one of the very few jobbers to find their way to working as a preliminary boy appearing in the opening matches for the WWF. Sadly, Louie had developed the worst case of slow suicide since Rick McGraw, much worse than Razor, Shawn, Kid, or Davey. The day before the India tour, Louie suffered a drug-related seizure, but there he was on the plane. I heard Owen warn Louie that the pills would kill him if he didn't smarten up. Louie said he had seen the light, and I wished I could believe it was true. The same day, the WWF fired Louie Spicolli because of his drug problems and hired Brian Pillman. On February 15, 1998, just days after expressing concern about the rapid drug use in WCW, Louie Spicolli was found dead in his home. The coroner ruled it coronary disease, but nearby were 26 empty Soma capsules, a bottle of wine, painkillers, anti-anxiety medication, and a vial of testosterone. Dr. Joel Hackett, whose name was on the prescription bottles, would later face suspension and charges for overprescribing Louie and other troubled wrestlers like Davey Boy Smith and Brian Pillman. Louie's death rocked the wrestling world. But as Bret Hart would later write in his autobiography, Hitman, there was more concern backstage about looming drug testing than the tragedy itself. WCW didn't allow Louie's name to be mentioned on air, except in passing by Larry Zbyszko, who stayed in character. The company embroiled the Monday Night Wars and continued as if nothing happened. Louie Spicolli was 27, the youngest profiled in a 2004 report on premature wrestling deaths. He was in the midst of a major push in WCW, but when the news of his death broke backstage, the show went on. Bret Hart will quote in his book, "Eric Bischoff was pissed, not about Louie dying, but about the inconvenience. Most of the guys in the back were more worried about the new drug test than losing a friend." Wrestling author R.D. Reynolds later wrote, "In the midst of all these incredible numbers, tragedy struck. Louie Spicolli, who had just turned 27 and was starting to get a push in WCW as a Chris Farley-like NWO lackey, died of a drug overdose. Spicolli, who took as many as 30 pain soma pills daily, had washed down 27 with alcohol, who was found dead in his home at 8:59 a.m., face down in his own vomit. It wasn't his first drug overdose. In fact, in 1996, while working for the WWF, he collapsed after taking 55 somas and was in critical condition for 2 days. Disturbingly, he had told friends just days before his death that he was concerned that the drug use in the company was getting out of control. The following Monday Nitro opened with a tribute for him. His close friends on the show weren't allowed to mention him at all. The only person who did bring him up was Larry Zbyszko, who had been feuding with. To show just how brazen some wrestlers in WCW were, Dr. Joel Hackett, who had prescribed the pills to Louie, was flown into San Francisco for that weekend's Super Brawl pay-per-view. Today, Louie is remembered by fans and insiders as a gifted talent with untapped potential, a man who was on the cusp of a major breakout when his demons, compounded by grief over his terminally ill mother, pulled him back under. In David Schwartz's expose on early wrestling deaths, Spicolli was listed as the youngest of the profiled wrestlers and perhaps the least known. But for those who saw him work, who knew the passion he brought between the ropes and the humor he brought behind the scenes, Louie Spicolli won't be forgotten. In life, Louie Spicolli was a journeyman. In death, he became a warning, a lesson. His finishing move, the Spicolli driver, lives on in rings today. His name is whispered backstage, along with a mix of fondness and sadness. Tommy Dreamer would comment, "He had heart, he had the tools, but the system wasn't built to save guys like Louie. It was built to use them up." He was the first IWF Interwest Wrestling Federation champion, a rising name in 3 major promotions, a friend, a cautionary tale. Louie Spicolli, too young to fall.